So the final session, Navigating Future Seas, MSP and the European Green Deal. I have great pleasure to invite the following panelists. So Ken Scow-Fisher, Executive Committee Chair of the North Sea Advisory Council. Thank you, Ken. Tom WOOLLEY, Marine Planning Advisor at the Government of Ireland, Department of the Environment, Climate and Communications. Although Tom, just pause for 1 second. Jure Hankoop, Senior Public and Regulatory Affairs Advisor from Ørsted. Thank you very much, Jure. And Remy Cossetti, Marine Policy Officer at Seas at Risk. Fantastic. And the session will be moderated by my colleague Christina CHRISTOFOROU-LIVANI. Just a note to Tom, thank you very much for stepping in. As you'll see in a moment, Tom is actually giving the keynote speech, but he has also stepped in because unfortunately Christine Keynote had to drop out at the last minute. So Tom, the floor is yours.
Dear esteemed participants in person and online, panelists, colleagues, friends of the MSP community in Europe, I'd like to thank the European Commission and in particular DG Mare for this timely and enlightening conference, as well as our French hosts welcoming us here to Marseille. Thanks all of you for resisting the charms of this wonderful city to join us for this final session of today, after a full and fascinating set of sessions so far. Excuse me. You've heard today about the achievements of the Maritime Spatial Planning Directive since it was adopted in 2014. In this session, we'll look at context, which has changed since then, as well as think about expectations for the future. So for a short while, I'd like to take you away from the sparkling waters of the Mediterranean and talk to you about our experience in the northwestern edge of Europe, beginning by describing the policy setting for MSP and the Green Deal. In Ireland, we recognise the global challenges of protecting the marine environment from biodiversity loss, pollution and the effects of climate change, and support actions we've signed up to through the Convention on Biological Diversity, the OSPAR Convention, our Marine Strategy Programme of Measures, and other national commitments. In 2019, the European Green Deal was introduced in response to the challenges of climate change and environmental degradation as a new strategy for growth that gives back more than it takes away, providing a framework for our continent to strive towards ambitious goals, no net emissions of greenhouse gases by 2050, economic growth decoupled from resource use, no person and no place left behind. Aligning marine activities with the goals of the European Green Deal, the Blue Economy Strategy, communicated in 2021, aims to provide coherence across blue economy sectors, facilitating coexistence and seeking synergies in the maritime space, without damaging the environment. It also underlines the need for investment in research, skills, and innovation. Europe's blue economy provides 4.5 million direct jobs, and over the past decade, the blue economy has taken significant steps to modernize and diversify. Alongside traditional actors, new sectors such as ocean and renewable energy are evolving, growing, providing new opportunities. In Ireland, ocean renewable energy is part of a holistic approach to climate change. Ireland declared a national climate emergency in 2019, followed by climate action legislation in 2021, under which annual climate action plans are published. Our current Climate Action Plan 2024, the first to be statutory, sets out the roadmap to deliver on Ireland's climate ambition. It creates a series of actions, owners, and timelines in a truly cross-government approach. It aligns with legally binding economy-wide carbon budgets and sectoral emissions ceilings that were agreed by government in July 22. The encouraging signs are that our approach is working, and a recent inventory report showed that overall emissions in Ireland fell in 2023 compared to 2022. In contrast, the economy grew by 5% in 23, pointing to a decoupling between economic growth and emissions. Ireland recognises the role offshore renewable energy can play in carbon emissions reduction and energy security, with the Climate Action Plan committing to achieving at least 5 gigawatts of installed offshore wind capacity by 2030. This target contributes more widely to the ambition for renewables to provide for 80% of Ireland's electricity needs by 2030. To achieve ambitious strategic targets, a holistic plan-led approach was needed. An important milestone on this path was reached with the creation of Ireland's statutory National Marine Plan, the National Marine Planning Framework, that was adopted by government in March 21. The NMPF provides a comprehensive set of policies for all activities and interests in Ireland's maritime area, from aquaculture to wastewater. It was developed to clearly articulate a common set of environmental, social, and economic objectives to inform decisions at all scales, plans, policies, developments, enabling sustainability in a wide variety of contexts. The NMPF recognises and complements existing work across government. For example, the MSFD and ongoing work in Ireland shaped the structure and approach for the NMPF's environmental ocean health chapters. Following the NMPF, in December 2021, the most significant reform to marine legislation since the creation of the state was completed, with the adoption of the Maritime Area Planning Act. This placed marine planning at the centre of decision-making for our maritime area, creating a new regulatory body, new powers for existing bodies, and a new novel way to plan. Under the MAP Act, Ireland has introduced powers to create subnational plans called Designated Maritime Area Plans, or DMAPs, which can be geographically or sector-specific. Our first DMAP, which identifies 4 areas for future offshore renewable energy development, has been approved by the Oireachtas, Ireland's Parliament. The development process has been informed by extensive stakeholder engagement and shaped by emerging evidence to ensure current activities are accounted for and minimise potential impact. Considerations that have shaped the areas identified for fixed foundation offshore wind include an extensive ecological sensitivity analysis, declaration of what is now Ireland's largest special protected area, covering 3,000 kilometres squared, and analysis of fishing and shipping activity. When sites in this new DMAP are combined with projects already under consideration, it's expected that once developed, the areas will deliver 7 gigawatts of installed capacity. Alongside this, Ireland has created a community benefit fund mechanism that supports initiatives for the wider economic, environmental, social and cultural well-being of local communities. This includes scholarships, community centres, education programmes and disability access projects. Marine planning has also informed government and work with NGOs through the long-running Green Schools programme to improve understanding of our marine resources and inspire the blue economy workforce of tomorrow. Ireland has further committed to protecting and conserving our rich biodiversity by expanding our network of marine protected areas to cover at least 30% of our marine region by 2030. A new MPA bill designed to enable designation of these areas is in its final stages of preparation. A €25 million LIFE project has been launched, which will be used to research and develop a comprehensive network of MPAs in line with international best practice. Work on our nature restoration plans for the Nature Restoration Law has commenced, and earlier this year, a new Infrastructure, Climate and Nature Fund was announced. The fund will enable, among other things, the implementation of nature-based solutions in coastal and marine areas to improve biodiversity, reduce pollution pressures and increase resilience to climate change through carbon sequestration and flood protection. Ireland has a long and rich history of marine research, with knowledge of our maritime area increasing all the time. The 20-year Infomar programme, due to complete in 2026, has so far mapped over 700,000 square kilometres of Ireland's seafloor in high resolution. The Blue Scale Map series, bringing together coastal satellite and topographical data with marine bathymetry, made headlines when it was released in 2023, further supporting public engagement with our seas. Up here, you'll see an example showing how engaging the maps are. This is the area around Cork Harbour, the location of European Maritime Day 2025. The Observe programme is using aerial and acoustic surveying to give us a better understanding than ever about occurrence, distribution and abundance of key marine species in our waters, such as cetaceans and birds. Marine planning is dependent on available and accessible knowledge, data, science and research to help build a trusted evidence base for our processes. Standards and quality systems have been developed for MSP data management. This has allowed us to create marineplan.ie, Ireland's marine plan and data accessible wherever you are via your phone. In the same period, we have seen substantial national and European funding channeled into related research and development. European sources of funding, such as EMFF and its successor MFAF, as well as Horizon Europe, have led to improved data and knowledge generation and spatial information on marine ecosystems and human activities. Such projects include Regina MSP, a project holding its closing conference on Thursday, which has brought countries together to better understand the role of MSP in communities and is helping Ireland develop its thinking on DMAPs. And now we turn to look ahead. The appetite for and role of MSP into the future in Europe has been articulated. Our European Oceans Pact will create a blue deal focused on boosting the blue economy and ensuring the good governance and sustainability of our oceans in all of their dimensions, and develop a comprehensive agenda for marine knowledge, innovation and investment. This will ensure coherence across all policy areas. In parallel, it's envisaged that marine spatial planning will be strengthened to help optimise the different uses of the sea and the ocean's economic potential, while safeguarding its health and resilience. Better coordination at a European level, particularly between data and evidence needs, including for MSP and MSFD, climate and energy, will help deliver Europe's Ocean Pact. The MSP directive is founded on the use of best available data, a principle that can be used to facilitate alignment between MSP and the Pact. Beyond Europe, work is being progressed to improve international coordination that will improve the integration of climate-smart trends into MSP plans. ICES has established an expert group to work on development of collaborative guidelines for climate-smart MSP. IOC UNESCO is also working closely with the European Union through MSP Global to develop key MSP concepts informed by best practice around the world. Europe has changed since 2014. Particularly for Ireland, we've been adjusting to our nearest neighbour, the UK, transitioning to a non-member state. However, even in the face of these new circumstances, the need for all states in the European region to work together for our seas is recognised, and greater than ever, so we can all make progress towards our climate targets, maintain and encourage innovation in our marine industries, facilitate trade, and meet our environmental aspirations. In this new reality, we've continued to collaborate through successful models of regional cooperation like the OSPAR Convention, while also identifying new ways of working together at a regional level, for example, through the Greater North Sea Basin Initiative. This is combining policy and scientific expertise across states to identify key issues for transboundary marine interests, sharing lessons, and developing common approaches that will inform marine plans of the future. So to conclude, over the last 10 years, MSPs allowed countries to develop a common language of understanding with all users of the maritime space, identifying aspirations for our seas and communicating this in plans. From Ireland's perspective, the next 10 years will be characterised by continued enhancement of our plans through development of subnational and sectoral planning to ensure national needs are met, while engaging with our neighbours in regional seas to recognise and overcome our common challenges. MSP has allowed us to articulate what we want from our seas. The next stage sees MSP as a fully integrated part of everyday life for policymakers, stakeholders and communities. This will ensure benefits for Europe, Ireland and our people are realised. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you. Hi, everyone. Let me, before we start the panel, to take a moment to thank everyone online who has stayed with us for the whole day, and especially to all of you who have made the travel to join us in Marseille. And although the sun is outside shining all day and Marseille is beautiful, you stick with us and you're here, and we've all made it to the final session of the conference. But let me tell you, it's definitely worth it. It's such a great momentum for us to be here celebrating a decade of MSP. Today, we've touched base on multiple issues, from celebrating member states adopting their national plans, to sharing lessons learned, to exchanging practices, but also reflecting with current and emerging challenges. And now, at the fourth and final session of the day, let us reflect on the day after the conference, on the future of our seas. And what's the best way to do it other than starting with a bit of setting our expectations and sharing with the European Commission and the Director of Maritime Policy and Blue Economy, Ms. Delila Al-Kuderi, a bit of our expectations about the Ocean Pact. You said we are here to hear, and I would like to invite our panelists to start a bit of some brief expectations. What do we expect to see? What would you like to see on the Ocean Pact, and how do you think it could influence the future? And yes, my job to direct the question. So I would like to take the opportunity, since Seas at Risk, along with some other very important NGOs in the field, recently launched the Blue Manifesto. I would like to invite Remy to take the floor and share your expectations.
Thanks. Thanks for having me here today. I'm from Marseille, actually, so I'm very happy to be back. Indeed, we have quite high expectations for this Ocean Pact. We campaigned during the elections on getting an ocean deal, basically to fill in the gaps, some of the gaps we saw from the Green Deal. And we've set our expectations on paper alongside 6 other blue NGOs on this Blue Manifesto. So it's a work from Seas at Risk, BirdLife, Client Earth, Oceana, Surfrider, and WWF. So the Blue Manifesto, the roadmap to a healthy ocean in 2030. Basically, yes, so it's a roadmap with a timeline and everything we want the EU to do from now to 2030 to achieve healthy oceans. It's been supported now by more than 140 organizations, so it's not only environmental NGOs, but also some private actors, businesses, startups, think tanks, social NGOs, yeah, quite a broad endorsement so far. And we have some key asks, and the main ask was to get an ocean deal, so it's really the blueprint for this ocean deal, Ocean Pact. Some asks relate directly to the MSP and the link with MSFD that we would like to see reinforced, but we have asked on basically every activities and policy areas that are linked with MSP. My colleague Helena mentioned this morning MPAs and 30% protection, also very important 10% street protection for us. On the rollout of offshore renewable energy, very important for us. So basically, yes, everything that needs to be done by the EU. For us, the main expectations of this Ocean Pact is that it needs to be more than just a declaration of intent, more than just a communication. The Green Deal at first was just a communication, right? But what was great about it is that it laid out a clear roadmap, clear commitments from the Commission on what it was going to do in the next 5 years in the last mandate. And we expect the same from the Ocean Pact, right? And the second big expectation is that it really plays across the board to every possible stakeholders. We mentioned also this morning consultation, civil society, actors of the sea, fishers, energy producers, but also basically every activity that impacts the ocean. Thinking of agriculture, for instance, and its runoff, transport, port development, so really playing across the board with clear commitments. Yeah. I still have some copies in my bag, if anyone is interested.
Please pick them up, it's very interesting. Thanks a lot, Remy. I would like to pass the floor to you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, first of all, for having me, slash us, of course. And congratulations on your anniversary. I think for offshore wind, it's particularly an interesting time to be here, given the state of the sector. We see some economic turmoil and supply chain issues, and I think we see MSP as a very important instrument in supporting the sector in this regard. So both for MSP and for the Ocean Pact, we don't know as much about the Ocean Pact for now, so I'll to some extent consider them synonymously. But I think there's roughly three reasons why it's important for us, or 3 areas where it's important for us, and I'll give a short suggestion on where that importance lies and where we could improve. So I think MSP and hopefully the future Ocean Pact helps in front-loading essentially political, spatial, and in the end regulatory challenges. Where we are speaking about political front-loading, I think that's the process where member states essentially, together with stakeholders, define which sector needs which amount of space. I think the MSP has been very successful there until this part, up to an extent. But I think we can do more in being specific on what amount of space we think are necessitated by specific sectors. Then on the spatial dimension, I think a lot of discussion, and rightfully so, goes into coexistence and into spatial conflicts within a country. Now, of course, that's important, but as has been stressed many times earlier today, it's also about these cross-national trade-offs. Which brings me to the last dimension, which is the regulatory dimension, which I think tends to be not enough in the spotlight, but also given my own job title. But I think with clever regulatory intervention and sort of technocratic work, we can sort of unlock a lot of large-scale cross-border marine spatial planning decisions. And one of the areas where I would be thinking of this is for example, the issue of hybrid wind farms and wind farms that are producing electricity for one country but are in another country. And I think in order to make these trade-offs, we'll need to make agreements on how these types of projects that have connections with multiple countries would need to function in terms of the electricity market design, would need to function in terms of revenues of these wind farms and how these are distributed among countries. Yeah, so I think these are roughly the three dimensions where the MSP has been very useful for us and where we hope to see development in the future and through the Oceans Pact.
Thank you very much. You're very comprehensive. Let's go to Tom. Would you like to take the floor? And then I will pass to Ken.
Thanks. I'll be brief. I feel like I've spoken enough. So I suppose looking at the pacts, as was mentioned, I think there's a lot to be fleshed out. But I suppose if we think about it as a parallel to the Green Deal or a blue version of the Green Deal, we're sort of thinking about an umbrella to kind of bring together the various initiatives, directives, laws coming out from marine-related directorates across Europe, potentially. And that, in turn, should provide for greater policy coherence. For example, in Europe's nature and energy goals, providing a clearer basis for states to use MSP to achieve those more coherent policy objectives over time. So,
Thank you. Ken, please.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I have to say it's been such a pleasure to be here today. The weather has been nice, the food has been great, and especially I think it's also been quite a learning program. I think we had a really good interventions from different people, and so certainly it's been great to coming to Marseille for this event. And well, in fact, I'm here being the chair of the Executive Committee in North Sea Advisory Council. This is set through the Common Fisheries Policy of the European Union, with a representation from all the countries around the North Sea, that is also including the Skagerrak and the Kattegat. And we are working, trying to get stakeholders together in the group and to discuss and find consensus on various subjects that has to do with how we use the sea and work with the sea. And I'll just come back to that. In my daily life, I have the privilege of being the CEO of the Danish Fishers Producers Organization. And we represent something like roughly 600 fishing vessels fishing in the Baltic Sea, in the North Sea, as well as in the Atlantic in different places. And we have a lot of work that is related to MSP, given that the areas I just mentioned where we do fish, there's a lot of an increasing competition of getting access to the sea. And therefore, the work on and the development of MSP over the years has been fabulous in many ways. It is such an important tool also for the fishers to actually be able to have some ways forward into some of the discussions on how we use the sea and how we split the use of the sea between different economic interests. Now, looking at the sort of the Ocean Pact, I have to say I'm probably the only one in this room, but I do get a little bit worried when I hear about this. I'm absolutely sure that this will be great to some degree. And the reason for me saying this is that we have already about to implement the NATO Restoration Law. We have still work to do on MSP. We still have work to do on Natura 2000. We still have work to do on Marine Strategy Framework Directive. We do, in fact, also have the Green Deal and some of the issues in that aspects. And then we also have something called the Marine Action Plan that the Commission presented last year. Now, I get a little bit confused about all these nice papers and all this work that actually, more or less, to some degree, are looking at the same water and how we're working with this. And therefore, I hope that in the Ocean Pact, and the other reason why I'm a little bit worried about this is that it is, to some degree, a top-down element that is being presented. And of course, now it has to be worked through, it has to be worked with. But it's just that when I hear this, and when you Google Ocean Pact, I had to do that. And then you see there's a lot of people with influence, former politicians, you have nice people working on different matters all around, doing a lot of thinking in this matter. And I fear that when you talk about the Ocean Pact, I can see there is some elements of top-down making politics that we just have to adapt to in all the other setups, and we do not have this stakeholder involvement that we actually have developed through the MSP strategy over the last 10 years. And that is something I hope the Commission certainly will take into consideration when they're actually looking at Ocean Pact and what is the aim of this, also given all the different policies that we are looking at. So I think in this room today we are two and a half person representing, actually 3 persons representing the fishing industry. And I have to say, for the fishers, I wish there were more representatives of the fishers here today, because it's, like I started saying, we learned a lot from the discussion. But it's also very easily becomes very complicated what we are talking about. And this scares the fishers away in this setup. And that's important also to remember. If you want to keep people on board in some of this setup, you also need to make sure that you have a proper dialogue and involvement of the stakeholders, the genuine stakeholders in the process that is going on.
Thank you very much, Ken. Well, message sent and message received. And from such a well-balanced and representative panel, as we have someone representing public authority, the private industry, civil society, and local communities. And if any of you had by any chance not heard of the Ocean Pact, well, now you know. And you better stay engaged and more involved to actually shape the future policy. And that brings me to a bit of taking some time to reflect on something that we touched base a lot on the previous sessions, which was the importance of actually integrating climate change considerations into planning and employing both adaptation and mitigation actions to reduce the impact of climate change. Our director in the opening speech made a reference to the climate smart MSP, and I would like us to take a moment to discuss or reflect a bit on what is it that has to be done to make MSP climate smart and ecosystem based. And I think we are very lucky today. We have Tom with us, as in the opening remarks. He made some great reference of what Ireland has been doing and some great examples. You also mentioned the Climate Action Plan that the Governor of Ireland has been introducing. And maybe you can tell us some of the examples of what Ireland has done to actually ensure that MSP is climate smart and ecosystem based.
Yep, so I'll speak to the climate smart piece mainly. And I suppose the key thing I was trying to convey in my opening speech was that marine spatial planning's place in the wider policy landscape. So, as I mentioned, we have this climate plan in Ireland. We've had a series of them now that are underpinned by legislation. And that really enables everyone across government to look at what they're doing and say, what's my role in this? How do I help with the challenges of climate change? And so while it's not MSP that's kind of projected this target, it certainly has informed what we've been doing. I suppose some of the points to mention that we've agreed nationally that are in our plan and related to policies is we are committed to ending the use of new oil and gas exploration licenses and have been for some time now. And that's formed the basis of our approach to related policy within the marine plan. I also mentioned that the Climate Action Plan is setting targets for how much wind, offshore wind we want to achieve by a certain date, and it's quite challenging to produce plans if you don't have things like that, a time and a target to meet it. And that's providing us with the sound basis we need to make plans. So that's, I suppose, on the mitigation side. I think Ireland's got a good story to tell there. On adaptation, I think we're beginning to make headway with research identifying potential opportunities for nature-based solutions at the coast and increasing awareness of the role different habitats play in carbon sequestration. We haven't brought them into planning yet, so we're still kind of figuring out what that looks like in Ireland for now. But I suppose my other reflection would be that the impacts of climate change in the marine area are most keenly felt at the coast, in our coastal communities, increased rainfall, storminess, rising sea levels. And because those impacts are most felt on the landward side, the main focus for adaptation work so far has really been through the lens of land and coastal infrastructure planning. And we need to do more to understand what marine spatial planning's role is in that complex picture. So from the sea looking towards land, I think we still need to detangle what is it that MSP does in that wider picture. So that's the climate smart side.
Thank you so much. Yes, please.
Yeah. Maybe just on climate smart MSP, for us, I guess the main priority in the years to come will be the implementation of the nature restoration regulation and making sure that it's well aligned with the MSP, right, well planned ahead. Why? Because, I mean, we know the ocean is our best ally against climate change, absorbing carbon naturally. And we see signs already now that on land, terrestrial natural carbon sinks are failing. There's new science that came out this week on forest. And basically, if natural carbon sinks stop absorbing carbon, if they fail, pardon my French, but we're fucked. So we need to make sure that the ocean does not come to that stage. And we know that the ocean is not right now in a really healthy situation. And for this, I mean, nature restoration is the best key. Passive restoration is known to be the most useful, basically the easiest way. So yeah, we really need to make sure that the natural restoration plan coming up are well aligned with MSP, and then also non-deteriorating in the future, right? So we need to plan ahead in the next like 20, 30, 50 years.
Thank you so much. And some things have to be said as they are, otherwise it's not alarming enough. Thanks a lot for the elaboration. I don't know if you would like to add anything on what we need to do to actually ensure MSP being climate smart and ecosystem based? From the fisheries perspective.
Yes, please. I'd like to say a few words on this matter, because I think we essentially, you all know that much better than I do, but if you look at the sea compared to the land, it's so easy to plan something at land. You can, anything from chicken production to build highways and so on. But the sea is a very dynamic to work with and to work on and to produce something in and so on. And I think what of course, we have to do what we can on energy production and green transformation and so on. And we have plenty of space for setting up windmill parks and so on in the sea. But in fact, some of the huge transition we're seeing already now is the water, increase of the water level. This will have major impact on coastal communities. We will see that maybe cities will have to move. We will see that we have to perhaps build something that is not part of the, so to say, coastal line that we do have today. Whatever we do in that respect, that will also do some changes in our MSP that will influence on how we do things. So in fact, we just had a report in Denmark this week saying that in 50 years, something like at least 10 of our cities near the harbors will, something like 40 to 60% of the cities will be under the water. We need to think about how we actually do things like this and taking that into account when we are looking into being climate smart in the future. And whatever we do to protect our coastal communities, that will also have an influence on how we actually work on the MSP to take things forward in this respect. Secondly, we also are looking into that with the climate changes, we also see that fish are leaving some areas where they used to be. We see the marine environment are changing from how it used to be. This is not something that happens from year to year. It takes perhaps 10 years, 20 years. The movement, you see stocks are moving perhaps 10 meters north in the North Sea every year and so on. And it's just that when you're dealing with things like that, it might be that areas that you have introduced for being nursery areas for fish, they might not in 10 years' time be relevant to take into account. So it is so important when we work with this, that we actually are monitoring what's going on in the sea, and we have enough resources to be able to monitor what's going on in the sea. And we have a flexible program on how we actually work on the MSP, because there is a tendency that as soon as you have created like a protected area, or you have, so to say, set up something, it's so difficult to change, no matter that nature actually are changing at a much faster speed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So my take from what the panelists have said is the emergency of the energy transition requires some coordinated activities, and that has actually revealed some special challenges. And this is where I would like to bring the quite sexy recently word multi-use, and pass maybe the floor to Remy. From the perspective of seas at risk, what is your perspective of the multi-use? Is it the solution that we see on this problem?
So, I mean, we are still developing our position on multi-use with our members. Seas at Risk is a membership organization, so we represent 35 members across Europe, national NGOs. So I can share some thoughts that we're having in discussion, but we don't have a set solution, like definition or solution yet. We do see it as a possible way forward, as a solution also to reduce tension in maritime spatial planning, right? And put different activities at the same space. But obviously for us, it has to be done with nature in mind. So we're all looking basically of what activities can be done together and the impact they can have on the environment. So thinking of offshore wind, for instance, we can imagine low impact aquaculture, even low impact fisheries in them. Sounds good, you know, in terms of reducing tensions. But the key for environmental NGOs, let's say, is that nature and nature protection restoration cannot be seen as a adjustment variable in this kind of planning, right? So it cannot be seen as a sector with co-use in it, basically. If you're setting up a protected area, then you can't do other activities in it. So yeah. But stay tuned, we will release a position on it at some point.
Thank you very much, Remy. And let me get to you. What is your take as a representative of a company focusing on offshore wind farms, taking a sector that takes more and more ocean space recently? What is your take on multi-use, and do you see any opportunities or challenges?
Yeah, definitely, and it's a topic that we often get to speak about. So I'm glad that I also get to speak about here. Yes, I think there is spatial conflict, and I think it's important for us to know the further we get into the future how big that spatial conflict is. I think in principle the sector, just because we are aware of our spatial footprint, but also because some governments require us to, we stand ready to facilitate co-use generally, knowing that it is an industrial site that we're working at, and that will need to guarantee the safety of our workers. Maybe that was the less constructive side out of the way, and I can make some constructive remarks as well. I think in incentivizing co-use, it's important to realize why we are doing that type of co-use, and roughly, I'd say there's 3 reasons why you would do co-use. At first, there's accommodating current users of the space that you're going to be using in the future, and for that type of co-use, I don't think there's a way out of having to do something in terms of compensation or collaboration to make up for taking up that space, and I think in the EU it's generally member states that take up the responsibility through MSP processes to figure something out to accommodate existing sectors. Then you have a second category, which is creating new economic opportunities, and I think that one has less priority in terms of necessity to make sure that nothing goes wrong. But aquaculture uses like that could be very useful in the future, or very beneficial in the future, just for our economic carrying capacity and the economic opportunities that we have. And then there's a third type of co-use, and from an offshore wind perspective, these might be the areas where we are guests, rather than what's usually the case, where other parties are quote-unquote guests in our wind farms. But it's this idea of unlocking new space for new use through allowing for co-use. And again, I heard Olivier say that we couldn't speak about defense too much, but I'll speak about defense in any case. One of the cases that we experienced is if you want to operate close to a defense zone, you tend to block radar signals, for example. And in order to compensate for that, you might need to accommodate radar systems within your wind farm. And that will then allow you to operate closer to a defense zone and unlock that space where previously you couldn't use it. So in short, I think it's important to be conscious about why you want co-use to actually happen, and then based on that target, determine how you can best incentivize it, and also see if co-use is even the best opportunity. I could also imagine, speaking about fisheries, that it might be more beneficial to have fisheries surrounding a wind farm, for example, where the wind farm itself is used for enhancing ecology and enhancing the fishery population within the wind farm. So, yeah, co-use might not even always be the right solution to the problem once you know what the actual problem is.
I see Ken wanting to react, and please do.
Thank you. I think co-use or multi-use is something that we will have to learn more about for the future. I think we're not there yet actually to be able to apply multi-use or co-use. I think there might be some great opportunities waiting out there somewhere. But today, I think many of us actually like to keep it simple. And by saying this is that when you look at what you just said on windmill parks, my experience is that when you have access to actually go fishing in such an area, nobody really wants to do so, because they cannot catch anything in the area for different reasons. And it's just basically the experience that at least we do have in Denmark, where we actually have had the opportunity of going fishing in between windmills and also near. And in fact, the consequences of like getting into troubles with vessels or different things like that, or getting too close to a windmill, also this uncertainty, people do not really want that. So like Jura said, maybe it's better to stay out of the area and so on. And secondly, actually, there's also the issue about the cables from the windmill areas. And they are perhaps, they're not as easy to see as the windmills in itself, but to some degree, they're probably a bigger hindrance for the co-use or multi-use than the windmill in itself. And there's an issue we also need to look into, on how actually maybe to have common ways of how to deal with the cables that we need to have to get the electricity that is being produced from the windmill areas. Secondly, on co-use, I also have to mention that when you're setting up a marine protected area, it might even be a highly marine protected area, there you also today find co-use that doesn't really make sense in the view of the fishers. Because you can have a highly protected area and still the military can go and make all kind of exercises in the area. I'm not sure there's that many fish left when they have done their exercises. Or you can have like a cruise ship with thousands of people on board, and they can drop their anchor in such an area. Perhaps not a highly protected area, but at least a marine protected area, and they can drop an anchor, and if there are two of them, they certainly will be just as good as a as a really big trawler in the same area. And there's some kind of maybe we do not this kind of multi-use. If we want to have protected areas, maybe we should talk about protected areas in general and not just in relation to the fisheries. So to some degree, if we can keep it simple, I think that's a solution on some of this. But I certainly see that there are many great interest ideas on co-use and multi-use in the different areas in the future. And given the spatial squeeze that we're looking into, we have to look into this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everyone. It's very interesting. You've all touched base in very interesting topics, and also you mentioned the importance of taking nature in mind and having marine protected areas always in mind as well when we focus on multi-use, and it's something we focused a lot today. And we'd love to focus more on this panel, but respecting the fact that we have a celebratory cake afterwards. And we do want to keep the spirit up. I would like to, unfortunately, I will not be able to give space for this kind of discussion now, although it's very important. But taking advantage of the fact that this is the final session of the day, and we have a new commissioner designate stepping in soon on fisheries and oceans, and since today we love sending messages, I would like to ask each one of you if you would like to take a brief moment and send a message to the Commissioner designate to take into account for the future policy and the future of MSP. And from now, please, whoever wants to step in, step in.
Sure, yeah. I hope the Commissioner is listening. I'd say I wouldn't want to give the commissioner the commissioner designate too much of a political task. But as I've said during the first question, I think there's a lot of regulatory low-hanging fruit in particularly fixing the regulatory frameworks surrounding hybrid and sort of other country-hosted wind farms, including the interconnection with the UK and how to interconnect wind farms. Which would enable truly cross-border planning of wind farm areas. And maybe more of a side question, just on our role in the ecological system, is I think there lies an interesting question in the role of offshore wind in nature restoration, both during its operational lifetime and after its operational lifetime. And I don't think anyone in the room has the answer right now, but it's for when the commissioner designates goes to bed at night and wants a topic to think about.
Thank you.
I mean, at night you can also read the Blue Manifesto, which is a very, very easy read. But that is obviously my main message from a commissioner designate. But maybe focusing on the fact that this has some new policy inside, some revision of existing legislation. But one of the key aspects that we expect in the next mandate is also implementation. And I mean, Ken mentioned quite a few of the legislations and action plans that have to be implemented. There's also quite a few more, like the common fisheries policy, for instance. So I think the main message will be this. I mean, we need strong regulations, but then we need strong enforcement and implementation of them. That's very important if we want to achieve our objectives.
Thanks a lot, Remy. Please.
Well, thank you. I think it will be a great job you will have. And I think there's plenty of work to do in this respect. And some of the most important thing is actually, all, like was just said, we need to get things implemented. We need to get moving in this way. At the same time, maybe we also need to start looking whether we have too much regulation in some of these areas. Maybe we need to have more like engagement with some of the stakeholders in some of the areas where they take responsibility and how to take things forward. When I look at like the common fisheries policy and some of the issues there's simply too much regulation. There's too much detailed regulation. And that's what we also need to look into when we are talking about, I would hope, an Ocean Pact, how we actually can get away from all the detailed regulation set in Brussels for all types of fisheries and all kind of activities near and at the sea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken. Last but not least, Tom?
Thanks very much. So I suppose 2 points, and trying to keep it short. I think echoing what I said in the opening speech, I think it's important to work towards policy coherence. So in MSP, we're dealing all the time with new things coming up, not just from DG Mare in relation to the directive, but requirements from DG Env in relation to things like nature restoration and conservation designations, and then DG ENA in relation to more comprehensively detailing areas for low carbon energy. And what we'd like to see is more coherence and thought at the Commission level about how those various initiatives, directives, laws should be deployed at the member state level. Because at the moment there's a lot of work happening in states, and we're talking to each other in states, like through the MSEG, about how do we deal with this, that and the other. And it'd be good just to see maybe a bit more from the higher levels about how those things fit together. And perhaps the Pact is the catalyst for that. And the other thing, I guess, and just echoing what Ken was saying, is in developing this under the new Commission and developing under the Ocean Pact, don't forget to support the implementation of the existing commitments. You know, we've spent 10 years developing an MSP system, developing skills, and as Olivia said earlier, we've just left primary school. So there's still a way to go, and it needs time, investment, talking, sharing. And there are so many things that we have committed to do in our seas that we still need to achieve, and we need time and support to do that. Better data, better expertise, improving our approaches to environmental challenge. The list goes on, and we have those things in place, and we need to make sure we continue to develop those and make sure we continue to work together as a community towards those objectives. So thanks.
Thank you very, very much, Tom, and I really like the way you ended. Definitely not an easy job, definitely a busy agenda, but the MSP community is going to be here to keep reminding and supporting the steps forward. And thank you so much for engaging the discussions and answering to my questions. And now I will turn into the rest of you, both online and offline, yes, too much hybrid and, and online calls. And both also you here, please go on the Q&A and share your questions with our panelists. Well, the first one referred to Ken, the most popular voted, reflecting on an earlier question, what would the fishing sector like to see from future MSP? Is there a change you would want in the MSP directive, Ken? Would you like to answer to this?
That is actually a good question. I think two challenges we do see in the MSP is that one thing is that it is to a high degree an implementation at national level. And therefore often in the process, even if you have a nice, genuine stakeholder involvement, you have all kind of hearing process and so on, it could be that you have a group of fishers from your neighbor country that actually likes to go and fish in your water. You don't really care about them. So in this process, we need to some way also to be better to take into account the interest of your neighbor countries in the process. I'm not sure how we actually would do that, but this is certainly something we have to look into in this on this. Then secondly, I'd like to mention that when you look at it all around in Europe, and you see we have the spatial squeeze, as we like to call it in the fishery sector, the competition for the access to the water is increasing. Now, what you find in most places is that you have areas that is being protected with good reason. That is for marine protected areas. You have areas reserved for the military. You have areas reserved for tourism. You have areas reserved for sea transport. But you do not really, as such, have areas reserved for fisheries. Fisheries can take place where all the others are not interested. And what you see in the fisheries sector is a growing interest to actually have their own reserves. The areas where fisheries are the first one actually to go into this area. And I think that's something we need to look into if we want to continue also to have food for production from the sea in the future, to make sure that we actually do have the waters for food production from the sea. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken. It's very interesting how people actually refer to the panelists who want to answer the question. I hope you don't feel too much pressure. If you need an escape, just click the eye on me and I will say my colleagues to delete the question. No. But would you like to answer the question since it referred to you? How do wind developers really view multi-use? Often developers are expected to drive this initiative. Is there a more equitable way to implement?
Yeah, which seems to imply that I wasn't giving a real view on multi-use before, but which I don't think, but I'm happy to elaborate, of course. And I see just to confirm the question and shout if it's not true, is the suggestion that we as a sector should have a smaller role in multi-use? I hear no objections to that interpretation. So,
I think it's saying that a lot of the MSP projects that look for the offshore wind developers to drive these initiatives. I think is what it's.
All right. No, that's very helpful, and I think. Again, it comes down to why are we doing this multi-use? And as I said, I think there's a category of multi-use where we take space of existing users, whether it's simply political pressure because of us taking that existing space from other users. So I think there's very much an interest on our side to make sure that political pressure doesn't grow too high, right? And that we make sure that we do the right thing for local stakeholders that we're impacting with our work. So yes, I do think that there's quite a lot of developers that take active quote-unquote roles in multi-use projects. I don't think generally they actually want to do these projects themselves in the future, but they're willing to support financially right now to make sure that there's a business case or a project or something along those lines, more in a supportive capacity. Maybe just one more small thing. I think the extent to which we have this active role depends very much on the local regulatory system, where in the EU, again, it tends to be member states that do this for us, this local community engagement through MSP. In countries like the UK, it tends to be us that are fully responsible for local community engagement, and therefore we also take a larger role there in actively having these projects.
Thank you very much. If I have the time, I would like to take 2 more questions. The most popular for now is for MSP to be successful, it needs to encourage the sectors to change to low impact models. What actions are sectors taking to be part of this change? So the panelists can decide who wants to step in and react to it. And the next one that I would like to pick up is, will the restoration target set by the Nature Restoration Regulation be considered within the MSP plans or the next reviews? And mostly because we didn't have the chance to actually elaborate on the relationship between MSP and MSFD and the nature restoration law. So up to you, who is the most courageous to step in.
Well, thank you. I think actually the fact is that this question, I like this question, I have to say. It is touching very much upon what you call the Achilles heel on some of this matter that we are dealing with. Because when you look at the MSP and this planning, I think to some degree also everyone is hoping that all the others will have to take the big part of the work at the end of the day. And I think also, in fact, but what the Commission also mentioned earlier on with reference to nature restoration regulation, and I think also when you look at, in fact, implementation of the Natura 2000 elements with MFSD, you will have to anyway to make some, so to say, changes to for like the fisheries to actually make it possible for them to be able to fish and also to make some changes in the way the fish there will be some demand in the regulation that fishers also have to follow, and that's not just about question about respecting a highly protected area. It can simply be to have access to fish at the end of the day. And I think that is also part of this that we need to be looking into with the nature restoration regulation, and like was said, the discussion on MSP needs to look into how we actually integrate the different types of regulation at the end of the day. I hope that was an answer.
Thank you so much, Ken. Well,
I'll just say a bit on the nature restoration question. We're very early days with the nature restoration regulation, and we're still kind of figuring out our process and plans and whatnot. So the question about what the interface between MSP and nature restoration plans is, something we're still developing on. However, I can say that the marine planning process we have is flexible enough to take on board evidence and emerging issues as they come across. I mentioned earlier the designated maritime area plan that was made. During that process, the largest special protected area in Ireland was created midway, and it did intersect with the area we were looking at in developing that plan. So we had to adapt the process to account for that designation coming aboard and think about it. So I have confidence that not only is our marine planning process flexible enough to intersect, depending on how timelines come together in future, to be able to take on board nature restoration requirements, but I'm also confident that the inevitable data that's used to support the nature restoration plans will be useful for MSP. So the evidence that's gathered through that process will be used in our MSP process, and we can use that to update what we understand about nature in Ireland, and that will be really useful.
thank you very much, everyone. Well, that brings us to the end of the session. Thanks a lot. Please, a big applause to our panelists.